Let me tell you about the whirlwind I called my life not too long ago. It was like living two lives, one where I was the devoted wife to my sick husband, and the other, well, that was the side of me I kept hidden under lock and key, or so I thought. So, there I was, in this swanky apartment that looked like it was ripped straight out of a luxury magazine, all thanks to my lover. He had this place decked out just for our little escapades. Kissing him goodbye felt like shedding a skin, one I had to wear whenever I went back to playing the role of the caring wife. My husband, bless his soul, was deep into his chemo for lung cancer, thinking his loving wife was off bending into a pretzel at a yoga retreat. If only. The rail kicker came the next day. I was lounging around, enjoying the kind of freedom that only comes when you think you've outsmarted your old life. Then my phone rang. It was my husband's doctor, sounding all serious and worried, thinking I was right there holding my husband's hand or something. He told me the news straight up. My husband's condition was getting worse. I put on my best worried wife voice, but the second I hung up, it was like a switch flipped. Shopping, I thought. That'll make me feel better. After all, I was about to inherit everything, right? Wrong. Fast forward to the weekend, and my lover, being the spontaneous guy he is, suggested we hit up this fancy hotel for a getaway. Picture this. Me, in my best dress, stepping into the lobby like I owned the place, and who do I see? My husband's best friend, looking right at us. My heart sank, but I laughed it off, throwing him a casual wave like I was just there for the brunch or something. Inside, though, I was panicking. Had he seen too much? That weekend was supposed to be an escape, a brief dive into a world where consequences didn't exist. But every laugh, every whispered promise felt hollow, knowing that my web of lies was getting more tangled by the second. I kept telling myself I was in control, that I could manage the fallout, but who was I kidding? My husband's friend wasn't just some random guy. He was loyal to a fault, and I knew deep down, my days of playing both sides were numbered. So, there you have it, how I danced on the edge, thinking I was clever enough to keep my two worlds from colliding. Spoiler alert. I wasn't. And as for that sinking feeling in my stomach? Turns out, it was my conscience, trying to break through the surface. Too bad I didn't listen until it was too late. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps us create more content you love. Thank you for your support. Imagine this. Me, living it up at this high-end hotel with my lover, completely oblivious to the storm brewing just around the corner. It was like I was in my own little bubble, thinking I was untouchable. But here's where it gets juicy. I left a trail of breadcrumbs so big, you'd think I wanted to get caught. My lover's watch, my lipstick on too many glasses, and receipts everywhere. I was reckless, and boy, did it come back to bite me. So, there I was, thinking I was slick, not knowing my husband's friend was lurking, snapping photos like we were celebrities on the down low. This guy, he was like a brother to my husband, and there he was, gathering all the ammo he needed. It's funny how you never see the knife coming until it's right there, huh? Fast forward to me waltzing back into my house, acting like the doting wife who'd just been away on a spiritual retreat. My husband was there, looking friendlier than ever, but with this smile that just about broke my heart. He said he was just so thankful for all my support through his chemo. Support, right, that word felt like a slap, especially with all the dirt I had just swept under the rug. But did I stop? Take a wild guess. Now, here's the kicker. Amidst all this chaos, my husband, with every ounce of strength he had left, gives me this necklace. It was stunning, sure, but it was more than that to him. He said it symbolized his hope for the future, our future. And what did I do? I just took it, barely a thank you, escaping my lips. I was eyeing it like it was just another piece to my collection, not the beacon of hope it was meant to be. Cold, right? Yeah, that was me. Every time I looked in the mirror, wearing that necklace, all I saw was the weight of my lies and the coldness of my own heart staring back. It's one thing to play with fire, but another to freeze everything out. That necklace, supposed to be a symbol of love and hope, felt more like chains around my neck, a constant reminder of the betrayal I was living. This is how I let greed and lust cloud my judgment, ignoring the love that was right in front of me. My husband, battling cancer, still found it in him to show me love, and there I was, plotting my next escape. Makes you think, doesn't it? About what we take for granted, about the choices we make. Let me tell you, looking back now, I'd give anything to go back and choose differently. But life doesn't work that way, does it? You play the cards you're dealt, and sometimes, you play them all wrong. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, life throws you a curveball that knocks you straight off your feet. That's exactly what happened to me, and boy, was it a doozy. So, grab a seat, you're not gonna believe this. It all started with a phone call from the hospital. I was in the middle of plotting my next rendezvous when the news hit me like a ton of bricks. My husband, the one I'd been sneaking around on, was getting better. Yeah, you heard that right. The cancer that was supposed to take him away from me, giving me a one-way ticket to freedom and wealth, was retreating. I put on my best, overjoyed wife voice, but inside, I was a mess. My golden ticket was slipping right through my fingers. As if that wasn't enough to knock me off my game, my lover, the one person I thought I could count on for some excitement and escape, started showing his true colors. Turns out, Mr. Perfect was swimming in debt up to his eyeballs. Our steamy, passionate encounters turned into him whining about his financial woes, looking at me like I was some sort of ATM, romance? Out the window. Now, it was all about the money. And just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, I find out I'm pregnant. Yeah, the cherry on top of this disaster cake. With my husband on the mend and my lover turning into a leech, I was stuck in a nightmare. Who's the father? Could I pass the baby off as my husband's and keep this charade going? The questions haunted me, day and night. I kept the pregnancy a secret, dodging questions and hiding my growing belly. The stress was unbearable. Here I was, juggling a sick husband who was suddenly not so sick, a lover who was more interested in my wallet than me, and a pregnancy that could blow my whole world to pieces. So, I did what I do best, put on a brave face and plotted. I'd figure out a way to keep the baby a secret until I could come up with a plan. Maybe my husband would never have to know, maybe my lover would hit the road if I cut off the cash flow. But deep down, I knew I was just delaying the inevitable. The truth has a way of coming out, and when it does, it's like a hurricane, tearing through your life and leaving nothing but chaos in its wake. That's the thing about secrets and lies, they're like a house of cards, delicate and fragile. And mine was about to come crashing down. Okay, so you think you've heard it all? Buckle up, 'cause this chapter of my life is a doozy. It's like, one minute you're juggling your secrets like a pro, and the next, it all comes crashing down so hard, you don't even know what hit you. Let's rewind a bit. There I was, thinking I could outsmart everyone, living my double life and loving it. But, as they say, all good things must come to an end, right? And end it did, with a bang. It all went down one seemingly normal evening. My husband's buddy, the one I always thought was a bit of a pushover, turns out he had a backbone after all. He couldn't take the lies and the deceit anymore. So what does he do? He shows my husband the photos. Yeah, those photos. The ones of me and my lover cozying up in places I shouldn't have been. The look on my husband's face when he confronted me, I'll never forget it. It was like he was seeing me for the first time, and man, the disappointment and betrayal in his eyes cut deeper than any knife. Is it true? He asked, voice barely a whisper but loaded with so much pain. Do you really need to ask? I wanted to say, but I didn't. Instead, I did what I do best, I lied. Flat out denied everything. But my husband, he'd done his homework. Hired a private investigator, can you believe that? And just like that, my world started crumbling. Photos, videos, texts, you name it, the evidence was overwhelming. There was no coming back from this. My husband, the man I vowed to stand by, in sickness and in health, looked at me with such cold determination, it sent shivers down my spine. He filed for divorce, and he made damn sure I wouldn't get a dime. Everything we'd built together, gone in the blink of an eye because of my selfishness. The worst part? There was a part of me that thought I could sweet-talk my way out of it, use my charm to soften the blow. But facing him in that moment, seeing the resolve in his eyes, I knew. This was it. The game was over. Leaving our home for the last time, I realized I'd lost more than just my marriage and my comfortable life. I'd lost myself, my dignity, and any scrap of respect he might have still had for me. So there I was, out on my own, with nothing but my regrets and a harsh lesson learned. Turns out, living a lie, no matter how thrilling it might seem, always comes with a price. And trust me, it was a price I paid in full. Ever heard the saying, be careful what you wish for? Yeah, well, I'm living proof of that. My life? It's like a cautionary tale straight out of a soap opera, only there's no commercial breaks or happy endings. Let me fill you in on the latest drama. So, I ditched my sick husband for my lover, thinking I was about to live the high life. Big mistake. Huge. Turns out, my lover's is broke as a joke. We went from living in a swanky apartment to getting booted out when he couldn't pay up. Ended up in this tiny, moldy flat that smelled like despair and broken dreams. And if you think that's bad, wait till you hear about the pregnancy. Yep, found out I was expecting. You'd think that might bring us closer, right? Wrong. My lover started acting all weird, questioning if the baby was even his. Talk about a kick in the teeth. There I was, pregnant and practically penniless, with a guy who suddenly acted like I was some stranger he regretted letting in. But hey, it gets better. Or, well, worse. The stress of everything. My crumbling love life. The impending single motherhood. The guilt eating at me for abandoning my husband. It all took a toll on me. Big time. I started feeling really off, you know? Ended up at the doctor's more times than I can count, and bam, got slapped with a diagnosis. Some chronic condition made worse by stress. Irony much? Now, I'm spending more time in bed than a cat, weak and sick, wondering how the heck my life turned into this mess. Living with my lover, or should I say, freeloader, became a daily reminder of how far I'd fallen. Our conversations? They were more like arguments drenched in bitterness and regret. This isn't what I signed up for, he'd say, as if I was the only one responsible for this disaster. And me? I couldn't even muster the energy to fight back. Too sick, too tired, too lost in my own misery. It's funny, in a tragic sort of way. I left my husband because I thought I'd find happiness and riches elsewhere. Instead, I found myself trapped in a life more suffocating than the one I ran away from. Alone, broke, and sick, this wasn't the plan. Not by a long shot. So here I am, lying in this dingy flat, staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the choices that led me here. My husband's probably moved on, finding happiness without me, while I'm just a shadow of the woman I used to be. If there's a moral to my story, it's that the grass ain't always greener. Sometimes, it's just astroturf painted to look pretty, hiding all the ugliness underneath. Guess it's true what they say. Karma really is well, you know. And let me tell you, she's got a wicked sense of humor. Let me tell you, hitting rock bottom has a way of clarifying things, like a slap in the face you never saw coming. My story? It's one of those, how the mighty have fallen, tales, and fall I did, hard and fast, from a life I thought I had all figured out. First off, my husband's recovery. You'd think I'd be happy, right? Wrong. The whole town was buzzing, celebrating his miraculous comeback from the brink. And him? He was the star of the show, with a new lady by his side. someone who was there for him when I chose not to be. I watched them from the shadows, my heart twisted with envy and a gut-wrenching regret. Seeing him so alive, so loved, it was like a punch to the gut. Then came the divorce papers. That moment when reality hits you square in the face, and there's no running, no hiding. I was alone, the illness I had shrugged off becoming a tangible reminder of my body's betrayal, just as I had betrayed. My lover, the one I risked it all for, bailed. The sickness, the lack of money, it was too much for him. There I was, abandoned, just like I had abandoned my husband. Court day was a spectacle, but not the kind I'd ever wanted to star in. My husband, looking healthier and happier than I'd seen him in years, didn't even spare me a glance. His testimony was calm, collected, a recounting of my betrayal that left no room for doubt. The judge's expression said it all. There was no sympathy there for me, not a shred. The gavel sounded, and just like that, it was over. The divorce was finalized, stripping me of everything I once held dear. But the real kicker? My husband donated a hefty chunk of our assets to cancer research, a final goodbye wrapped in a bow of revenge and closure. It was poetic, really, in a twisted sort of way. Walking out of that courthouse, the weight of my choices bore down on me like never before. I had lost everything. The wealth I coveted, the love I took for granted, and even my health, which I had always assumed would stand by me, faithful when no one else was. And there it was, the bitter end of a chapter one had written with my own selfish desires. No wealth, no love, no health. Just me, and the stark realization of what my betrayal and greed had cost me. It was a hard pill to swallow, realizing that the price of my actions was a life devoid of the very things I had sought to secure. So, what's the moral of this sorry tale? Maybe it's that life has a way of balancing the scales, of teaching us lessons in the harshest ways possible. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just about the choices we make and the inevitable consequences that follow. Either way, here I am, telling you my story, not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes, the things we think we want the most can end up costing us. It's not even my divorce paper, technically. It's his and hers. Their names, printed together like it's some achievement to celebrate. My stomach churns, and I swear, for a moment, the room tilts off its axis. He won't be home for a while. Thank God for small mercies, I guess. I don't think I could look at him right now, not without. Well, I don't even know what I do. A tear burns down my cheek, like some kind of twisted joke. I furiously wipe it away. No more of that, he's not worth the waterworks anymore. For a second, I imagine tossing those papers into the fireplace, making this whole mess vanish in a flash of flame. Then there'd be nothing, at least no official record of him and her. I almost laugh, like that would fix anything. I glance out the window, half expecting to see his car pulling into the driveway. Part of me secretly hopes he will, that we can have it out with each other. One big fiery argument, and then I can shut the door on this whole nightmare. But the street is empty. That dull ache at the base of my skull? Yeah, that's here to stay. Finally, I tuck the blasted decree into a drawer, slamming it shut. I've got to get out of here, before I lose what's left of my mind. The house still reeks of him, but even worse, it thrums with the memory of her. The perfume I always suspected, the way he'd linger in the doorway after late nights at work. It's all so damn obvious now. I grab a coffee to go, almost stumbling over the dog, bless his furry heart. At least someone in this house is always happy to see me. The walk helps, but just a little. It's like my body's on autopilot. My thoughts, though, they're a swirling hurricane inside my head, spinning so fast I can barely breathe. Should I call someone? My brother would be furious on my behalf, my best friend a sobbing mess. Right now, neither sounds appealing. I just need something. A buffer between me and the world. Maybe just a long, long drive. Hell, maybe I won't even come back tonight. I should have known it would end like this. The highway blurs, not from tears this time, but the sheer speed I'm pushing this old car to. Music blasts, some angry female singer I barely recognize, mirroring the scream trapped in my own throat. I need to feel something other than this gnawing hollowness inside. Where am I even going? It doesn't matter. Just away. Away from the house, from him, from all those pitying whispers that would follow me around town. Even now, I imagine them talking, the neighbors, my mom. Everyone pretending it doesn't sting. Like I'm not the fool who was blindsided while he. My phone buzzes. It's him, of course. My hands clench on the wheel, a surge of anger replacing that sickening pit in my stomach for a convince me it's not what I think. For a second, I consider answering, just to rip him a new one. But no. He doesn't get that satisfaction. I toss the phone into the glove compartment, silencing it. He can stew for a while. Miles fly by. Eventually, the adrenaline rush wears off and exhaustion seeps in. I pull over at a seedy-looking motel, the kind you only stop at when you're desperate. I don't even care. The room is dingy, smells like cigarettes, and the bed sags in the middle. It matches how I feel, so whatever. I collapse on top of the thin covers, not bothering to change. It's only in the grim silence of that room that it fully hits me. Those dinner conversations, the way he'd linger in doorways after, late nights at work, and my own stupid excuses. It's also painfully obvious now, a trail of clues I refuse to see. Was I that blind, or did I just not want to admit the truth? Sleep, when it finally comes, is fitful and haunted. He's there in my dreams, but his words are twisted, her name echoing from lips that were once mine. I wake with a gasp, tangled in the thin sheets and soaked in sweat. Morning brings zero clarity, my reflection in the grimy bathroom mirror is a stranger. Eyes bloodshot, hair a disaster. This is what he's done to me, reduced me to this shell of a woman. But mixed with the heartbreak, there's a flicker of something else. Determination? Anger that's not aimed at myself? I grab my stuff and check out with the bored clerk staring at his phone. The sun glares off the asphalt, and my head pounds in protest. Coffee. I need coffee and a plan that doesn't involve running away forever. He might have broken me, but he doesn't get to own the pieces. Time to start putting myself back together. My brother was right, I do deserve better, but right now, just surviving feels like an achievement. I head to a greasy diner where nobody knows me. At the counter, the waitress throws a refill my way without asking. I need the caffeine, but what I really want is oblivion. Something to numb the constant loop of betrayal running through my head. After downing my second coffee, I force myself outside. Deep breaths, one foot in front of the other. It's time to deal with the mess that's become my life. First up. Facing the digital ghost of his perfect new relationship. I unlock my phone with shaking hands. Her social media is like a punch in the gut. Every smiling selfie, every carefully staged vacation shot feels calculated to hurt. Did they do this stuff together when he was still with me? I scroll through endless photos, nauseous and fascinated at the same time. I try to analyze their body language, searching for some sign of fakery, but her happiness seems painfully genuine. Then, my mom calls. I let it ring and tell voicemail. I'm not strong enough to pretend everything's okay to answer her worried questions. Maybe tomorrow. For now, I just need to breathe. I try to distract myself, cleaning out my purse, scrolling through old messages. But everything seems tainted with a memory of him. I swipe viciously and realize, with a shock, I've deleted almost everything. Like it's a childish attempt to erase him entirely. The rest of the day is a blur. I pick at takeout food back in my motel room, my eyes drawn to the sheets and the grimy mirror. Every inch of this place now reminds me of his betrayal. This is rock bottom, and there's only one direction to go from here. I force myself to shower, scrubbing away the exhaustion and the stink of despair. When I look in that damned mirror again, I see something different in my eyes. It's not the heartbroken woman from yesterday. There's a flicker of something steely. My siblings will be texting, checking up on me. My mom will call again. I know they're all worried, but I can't handle their pity right now. The only person I can talk to is my best friend. She's the one who knows how to piece me back together. I grab my phone. This time, I answer the call. Her voice, a rush of concern, nearly breaks me. But instead of tears, I find myself talking. It all spills out, the motel, his lies, the damn social media posts. Instead of a sobbing breakdown, what comes out is rage. It burns hot, fueled by the injustice of it all. She doesn't try to sugarcoat it. She cusses him out, then cusses her out too. But through it all, there's a strength in her voice, a certainty that this isn't the end of my story. Maybe she's right, maybe this is the part where I stop being the victim and start fighting back. My friend was right, talking it out unleashed this raw energy inside me, a fury that had been buried beneath the shock and the sadness for too long. It's time to take my life back, one damn step at a time. I book a room at a proper hotel, no more seedy motels with their depressing vibes. Small victory, but it feels significant. The next morning, I drive back home. I don't even try to stop myself from blasting angry breakup songs on the radio. Every word about betrayal and starting over echoes exactly how I feel. It's not a healthy soundtrack, but it beats the sound of my own despair. As I pull up to the driveway, a familiar song cuts through the noise in my head. It's our song, the cheesy one he dedicated to me years ago, back when we were stupid happy. I should turn the radio off, but instead, I crank it louder. Every sugary lyric grates against my ears now, a twisted reminder of all the broken promises. Inside the house, the silence is deafening. I half expect to see something different, a sign that this entire nightmare has been a bad dream. Of course, nothing has changed. Even the air still holds a trace of her perfume, a constant, taunting reminder. I force myself upstairs, stealing for the side of the bed we shared. Instead, I open the closet. His side is bare, gone. He cleared his stuff out, the coward. It should make me sad. It should make me even angrier. But instead, it sparks a wicked sort of relief. It's done. Finished. The rest of the day is a whirlwind. Boxes appear as if by magic, thank you, overprotective brother, and I toss in belongings with reckless abandon. It's an exorcism, each discarded shirt and crumpled tie another piece of him cast away. Sleep won't come. I find myself on the couch in the dim light, my laptop open, fingers poised over the keyboard. It's time for truth, divorce lawyers, infidelity statistics, how to know it's beyond saving. Each Google search seems to echo with judgment. I tell myself it's just information, but deep down, I know I've already passed the tipping point. Finally, at a truly indecent hour, I type an email to my brother. Lawyer recommendations? Need a good one. I press send, then curl into a tight ball on the couch. I won't sleep tonight, but the decision feels strangely liberating. Later, I'll question if this is the right choice, if I'm being too rash. But tonight, for the first time in ages, something like closure feels within reach. He cheated. He lied. Now, it's my turn to take control. This mess is no longer going to define me. It's going to fuel me. My brother's response comes fast, got the best. We'll send deets. It's weirdly comforting, the no-nonsense way he treats this like just another problem to solve. I wish I could be so clinical about the whole thing. Later that day, I find myself in some sterile office downtown, sitting across from a woman in a power suit. Her name's Andrea, and her smile is a shark's grin. She talks fast, throws around words I barely understand, assets, alimony, injunctions. It's overwhelming, a brutal reminder that my life has become a legal battleground. He wants this done quickly and quietly, she explains with a practiced air of sympathy. I'd advise the same, for your sake. Something about her tone grates. Is that a dig at me? It doesn't matter. I just want this over. Clean cut. Leaving the office, I'm nauseous. Every step carries me further away from the life I knew. And that's the point, I remind myself. I chose this. But on the drive home, the panic bubbles up. Have I made a terrible mistake? News travels fast in small towns. People I barely know stop me at the grocery store, offering condolences like I've suffered a death in the family. And maybe, in a way, I have. The death of my marriage, of the future I'd envisioned. My phone buzzes. It's him. My stomach twists. I don't answer, couldn't even if I tried. The voicemail fills me with a mix of disgust and morbid curiosity. His voice is soft, apologetic. It's an act, and I'm no longer fooled. The next morning, his parents are at my door. His mother looks stricken, tears welling in her eyes. His father, stern and stiff, offers only a clipped, "We're so sorry." It feels like an accusation more than an apology, and a flicker of anger sparks inside me. I'm not the one who did this to their precious son. The days bleed together. Friends tentatively reach out, some offering support, others just awkwardly curious. I avoid them all, each interaction feels like another reminder of what I've lost, what I've become, the pathetic woman everyone pities. Then, it happens. I'm sorting through a box of old stuff when I find it. A necklace I never wore, a cheap heart pendant that reeks of guilt and last-minute panic. I imagine him scouring some tacky display, trying to buy his way out of trouble. Rage surges through me. I hurl the necklace against the wall, and it shatters with a satisfying crash. Tears stream down my face, hot and furious. This is what he's reduced me to. But as the tears flow, something shifts. I feel lighter. The anger burns away the last of the sadness, leaving a hollowed-out space in its wake. Maybe it's a start. I stare at the legal documents Andrea sent. Every page feels like a death sentence. There's a sickening finality to words like settlement and dissolution. With a few scratches of a pen, a lifetime together will be reduced to financial figures and legal jargon. My stomach churns, but I manage to sign. Court is nothing like what I'd imagined from TV dramas. It's drab and bureaucratic. My lawyer and his lawyer talk in hushed tones, and I'm barely a participant in my own life unraveling. He's not even here. Couldn't summon the courage to face me, it seems. The judge's voice is a low drone. Do you understand the terms of this decree? He asks. I want to scream, no. I don't understand any of it. How did I get here? Why am I the one being punished? Instead, I force out a choked, yes. The gavel comes down with a thud that echoes in the hollow chamber of my heart. We are no longer us, but adversaries, his name and mine joined only by the versus that separates us. The weight of it all hits me later. Walking alone down those courthouse steps, a cold rain begins to fall. It feels fitting, a pathetic imitation of the silent tears I can no longer shed. My shoulders slump under the onslaught, and for a dangerous moment, I want to give in, to just stand there and let the world wash over me until I disappear entirely. Days turn into nights, blurring together. Andrea calls with updates, her voice devoid of emotion as she outlines the brutal division of our life. His possessions, my possessions, what we fought over, what we gave up. It's a soulless inventory of heartbreak. Then, amidst the bleakness, a tiny flicker of light. It's a simple card from my old high school English teacher. I haven't thought about her in years. Inside, written in her neat script, is a quote. Sometimes falling apart is how you make space to grow. I stare at it, the words seeping in slowly. Growth? It seems like an impossibility. Right now, I feel reduced, broken. but a tiny kernel of something stirs within me. Maybe she's right. Maybe this shattering is a necessary part of some rebuilding I can't yet imagine. I find the energy to start packing up the house. Each box is a weight I am finally shedding. The act of dismantling our life feels oddly empowering. It's a start, a tiny act of control when everything else has spun so wildly beyond my grasp. It's time to create a life that's entirely mine. Whatever that life might look like, it'll be free from the weight of his moving day is a blur of boxes and forced efficiency. This house always felt too big, echoing with a future I never got. Now, it's nothing more than a space I'm eagerly fleeing from. With each item I pack away, I feel a flicker of something resembling hope. The new apartment is small, impersonal. Bare walls and the faint scent of fresh paint speak of potential, but also a daunting emptiness. My brother and best friend help me move, filling the silence with attempts at light-hearted banter. I appreciate the effort, but their cheerfulness feels forced, a stark contrast to the dull ache inside me. Later, alone for the first time in my strange new space, silence descends like a suffocating blanket. I make futile attempts to distract myself, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture. But nothing can drown out the emptiness that echoes louder than any noise. In the dead of night, I find myself on the couch, an old photo album cracked open on my lap. Smiling faces stare back, me and my friends, my parents, me and him. The photos trace the history of our relationship, youthful joy, wedding photos, holidays. With a numb finger, I trace the outline of his face. Who even was this man I thought I knew? The album falls shut, a weight on my chest. Sleep offers no respite, just an endless cycle of betrayal and heartbreak. I wake unrest, the lingering memory of his lies an acidic burn. I try to cry, but even that feels empty now. My brother's voicemail replays in my head, he's not worth the tears. Remember that, it's harsh, but maybe that's what I need right now, a dose of brutal reality. Anger, hot and sharp, finally cuts through the fog of sadness. Enough, time to reclaim the parts of me he tried to erase. I find his old messages on my phone. With each deleted conversation, I feel a small weight lift, his number goes next, I stare at his name on the screen, my finger hovering over send. Proof of a final, definitive severing. I press the button, and a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow washes over me. In a frenzy, I clear out the rest of his belongings. A forgotten vase, a tacky souvenir from some trip, an old shirt I'd meant to throw out ages ago, all of it finds its way into the trash with ruthless efficiency. Except one thing, that awful heart necklace, the one I found hidden away. Instead of throwing it out, I smash it, taking a perverse pleasure in watching the cheap things shatter. Later, exhausted and trembling, I collapse on the couch. The dog nudges my hand with her wet nose, her eyes full of silent concern. I curl into her warm fur, finally letting the tears flow. It's not the release of despair, but the first step towards healing. Weeks pass in a blur of unpacking and restless nights. My new job at a local bookstore is a welcome distraction. It's simple, quiet, and requires minimal brainpower, just what I need right now. I lose myself in the smell of old paper and the comforting weight of books in my hands. One day, skimming the local newspaper, his name jumps out at me. There's a small blurb about his company and some new project. My heart thuds, an involuntary reaction, but the crushing pain I'd expected doesn't come. It's more of a dull ache now, a distant reminder rather than an open wound. Then the box arrives. No return address, just my name scrawled across the top. I hesitate, should I even open it? But curiosity wins out. Inside, it's a jumble of old stuff. Faded photos, a cheesy souvenir keychain, a concert ticket stub. Reminders of a past that now feels like it belongs to another person entirely. I sort through it all with cold detachment. Most of the items find their way into the trash without a second thought. My hand pauses, however, over a worn postcard from a beach vacation we took years ago. It was before the cracks started to show, before everything fell apart. For a moment, I'm tempted to throw it away, but instead, I tuck it in a drawer. A small token of a happier time, nothing more. The encounter is what I needed. It's a meeting I didn't know I wanted, a chance to confront the past head-on. Outside the cafe, a light drizzle begins. I barely notice until he holds out an umbrella. His touch on my arm sends a ripple of disquiet through me, but it's fleeting. As we navigate the crowded sidewalk, the conversation is stilted, full of the unspoken weight between us. "I'm sorry," he says quietly. "It's not enough. It will never be enough." I know, as all I manage. No anger, no bitterness, just a quiet acceptance of the truth. We part ways then, his retreating form dissolving into the crowd. I walk away, and something strange happens. I feel lighter than I have in months, as if this accidental meeting has finally loosened a knot I didn't know I still carried. That night, I rage drive. Windows down, music blasting, I scream into the darkness, finally purging the last remnants of heartbreak and fury. Tears stream down my face, but they feel different, cleansing. Then, silence, not the oppressive silence of before, but a quiet space filled with potential. The next morning, I attack my apartment with newfound determination. Gone are the muted neutrals and the carefully curated decor that mimic magazine pages. In its place bursts vibrant colors, mismatched patterns, and art that speaks to me, not to some image of domestic perfection. It's messy, a bit chaotic, but the night was still, almost unnaturally quiet. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of a car passing by, and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Dan sat across from me, flipping through his phone, blissfully unaware of the bomb I was about to drop. I took a deep breath, feeling the words claw their way up my throat. "Dan, there's something I need to tell you," I blurted out, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, eyebrows raised, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "I've been thinking. About us. About being shared," I said, my face burning with embarrassment. The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. For a moment, there was nothing but stunned silence. I could see the wheels turning in Dan's head, processing what I had just said. Then, to my surprise, a slow smile spread across his face. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice tinged with excitement. I nodded, my heart racing. This could either go really well or spectacularly wrong. There was no in-between. "I've actually thought about it too," Dan admitted, his eyes gleaming. "I just never had the guts to bring it up." Well, that was unexpected. We spent the rest of the evening talking, setting boundaries, and discussing potential scenarios. It was weirdly exhilarating, planning this out together. I felt a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation bubbling inside me. The next night, over dinner, we got into the nitty-gritty details. Dan, ever the planner, suggested involving his best friend, Mark. Mark was charming, discreet, and, most importantly, someone we both trusted. As we cleared the dishes, Dan picked up his phone to call Mark. My nerves were on edge as I listened to the one-sided conversation. When Dan hung up, he looked at me with a grin. "Mark's coming over tomorrow night," he said. "He's intrigued but wants to talk it through first." The following day was a blur of preparation and anxiety. By the time the doorbell rang, my stomach was in knots. Mark walked in, all casual charm and easy smiles. We had drinks, made small talk, and danced around the elephant in the room. Finally, Dan brought it up. Mark looked at us, a mix of intrigue and caution in his eyes. "I'm open to it," Mark said slowly, "but only if everyone's comfortable." We all agreed to take it slow, start with dinners to build familiarity. The first encounter was awkward as hell but also thrilling. There was an electric undercurrent that none of us could ignore. Over the next few weeks, Mark became a regular at our dinner table. The dynamic between us began to shift. There were subtle touches, lingering glances, and an undeniable tension that built with each passing night. One evening, after another of our increasingly intimate dinners, I caught Mark's eye across the table. There was a spark there, something raw and unspoken. I glanced at Dan, who was watching us with a strange mix of possessiveness and excitement. The stage was set, this was just the beginning, and I had no idea where it would lead. But I was ready to find out. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation, but here I was, setting the table for another one of our twice-weekly dinners with Mark. It had become a regular thing, almost routine, but the excitement hadn't worn off. If anything, it was getting more intense. Every visit, we pushed the boundaries a little further, and I couldn't help but wonder where this was all leading. It started innocently enough, or as innocent as this kind of thing can be. We established a schedule, Mark visiting every Tuesday and Saturday. Each interaction was bolder than the last. Subtle touches turned into not-so-subtle ones, and our conversations grew more explicit. I felt a thrill each time, a mix of fear and exhilaration. Then, one evening, after an especially intense session, Dan dropped a new idea on me. "What if we recorded this?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with excitement. I hesitated, the thought of having our escapades documented making my heart race for all the wrong reasons. But then again, it was another layer of thrill, wasn't it? I agreed, thinking it might add to the excitement. We bought a discreet camera, and Dan eagerly took on the role of director. It felt strange at first, being on camera, but soon it added a whole new dimension to our encounters. The exhibitionism was intoxicating, a secret we shared that made every moment feel more charge. Of course, people started noticing Mark's frequent visits. Our neighbors, our friends, they all seemed curious about why he was around so much. We crafted a story about working on a business project together, which surprisingly, everyone seemed to buy. It was almost laughable how easily they accepted it. Little did they know what was actually going on behind closed doors. One weekend, we decided to take a little getaway. The three of us headed to a cabin in the mountains, and the change of scenery was just what we needed. Away from prying eyes and daily routines, our interactions were more intense and liberating. I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I craved. Everything seemed perfect. Back home, reviewing the footage became part of our routine. We'd sit together, analyzing each encounter, discussing what we enjoyed and how we could push our boundaries even further. It was like watching an action replay of our lives, each frame a reminder of how far we'd come and how much further we could go. But as thrilling as it all was, I couldn't ignore the changes in Dan. He was becoming more possessive, more protective. It was subtle at first, a lingering hand on my shoulder, a look that lasted a bit too long. But soon, it was clear. He was having a hard time sharing me, despite the initial excitement. His jealousy was a new wrinkle in our arrangement, one that added a complex and, frankly, confusing layer to our relationship. I started to wonder if this was sustainable. Was the thrill worth the tension? Could we find a balance, or were we heading towards a crash? Every glance, every touch from Mark felt like a spark, but in the back of my mind, Dan's growing possessiveness loomed like a storm cloud. As I set the last of the silverware on the table, I took a deep breath. Tonight was another dinner with Mark, another step in our unpredictable journey. I had no idea what was going to happen, but I knew one thing for sure. It was going to be anything but boring. "Hey, how about we mix things up a bit?" Dan's voice broke through my thoughts as we cleaned up after yet another intense dinner with Mark. My curiosity piqued, I looked up from the dishes. This usually meant Dan had some wild idea up his sleeve, and judging by the glint in his eyes, tonight was no exception. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual while my mind raced with possibilities. "Well, what if we involved another couple?" Dan suggested, his tone almost too nonchalant for the bombshell he just dropped. I blinked. Another couple? My first reaction was to laugh off the suggestion, but then curiosity started to gnaw at me. Could this work? Would it make things better or just mess them up more? I don't know, Dan. Sounds complicated, I said, though the idea had already started to take root in my mind. We met Sarah and Tom at our gym, a fit, fun couple who seemed pretty open-minded. After a few casual outings, Dan and I decided to test the waters. Over drinks one night, we broached the subject. I expected awkwardness, maybe even a firm no, but to my surprise, they were intrigued and willing to explore the possibility. Our first group encounter was a roller coaster of excitement and nerves. The dynamics were definitely different. It took a bit to adjust, but once we found a rhythm, it was exhilarating. The novelty of the situation added a fresh layer of thrill, something new to discover and navigate. Sarah and I started spending more time together, sharing our thoughts and fantasies. She was easy to talk to, and we connected on a deeper level than I had anticipated. This newfound intimacy with her added depth to our interactions, but it also complicated things. The lines between friendship and something more began to blur, and I found myself in uncharted territory. Meanwhile, tension started bubbling beneath the surface. Dan and Tom, while cordial, occasionally clashed over control and boundaries. It was subtle at first, a remark here, a sideways glance there, but it was enough to put me on edge. Our delicate arrangement was being tested, and I wasn't sure how long it would hold. Then came the tipping point. During a particularly heated argument between Dan and Tom blurted out something that changed everything. "You know, I've started to have feelings for her," he confessed, looking straight at me. Great, just what we needed, more emotional complications. Tom's confession created a rift, and suddenly, everything felt shaky. We had to reevaluate our arrangement, and fast. Could we really continue like this? Dan and I decided to take a break from involving Sarah and Tom. We needed to focus on us, on repairing the cracks that had started to form in our own relationship. The time apart brought a strange sense of clarity. We talked more, shared more, and slowly, we began to find our footing again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm. The excitement, the thrill, it was all still there, simmering just below the surface. And as much as I wanted to believe we'd sorted things out, I knew deep down that the mystery of where this journey would take us next was far from over. I always thought secrets were supposed to stay hidden, especially the ones you keep in a journal. But there it was, my little black book of confessions and fantasies, in Dan's hands. He must have found it while looking for something else, classic snooping gone wrong. The look on his face was a mix of betrayal and confusion, like I just slapped him with the truth. "You kept a journal about this?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but the hurt was loud and clear. Great, just great, as if things weren't complicated enough already. I felt a lump form in my throat as I tried to muster an explanation. "Dan, it's not what you think," I started, but the words sounded hollow even to me. He put the journal down, his eyes hardening. The conversation that followed was brutal. We sat at the kitchen table for what felt like hours, hashing out every little detail. He admitted his fears and insecurities, things he'd never voiced before. I felt a mix of guilt and relief. Guilt for betraying his trust, but relief that we were finally talking about the elephant in the room. We agreed to take a step back from our adventures. It was hard to imagine our life without the thrill of it all, but we needed to rebuild trust. The period that followed was challenging, to say the least. We spent more time together, just the two of us, trying to reconnect. It felt strange, almost like we were starting over, but it was necessary. Mark, sensing the tension, started to distance himself. His absence was like a missing piece in our puzzle. It added another layer of complexity to our already strained situation. I missed him more than I cared to admit, but I had to focus on us. In an attempt to break the monotony, we decided to take a trip. A change of scenery, away from our daily routine, seemed like a good idea. We headed to a quiet beach town, hoping to rediscover each other amidst the sound of waves and the smell of salt air. One evening, while having dinner at a seaside restaurant, we met a couple who were also exploring similar dynamics. Their openness and honesty were refreshing. Hearing about their experiences provided a fresh perspective. They shared tips on maintaining balance and trust, which resonated deeply with us. By the time we returned home, we felt a renewed sense of purpose and commitment. The trip had done wonders for our relationship. We were ready to navigate our complex desires with newfound clarity. It wasn't going to be easy, but we were stronger and more connected than ever. As we settled back into our routine, I felt a cautious optimism. Our journey was far from over, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead. But for the first time in a while, I felt hopeful. We had faced a storm and come out the other side, not unscathed, but certainly more resilient. And that, I realized, was the most thrilling adventure of all. You know that feeling when you think you've finally got everything under control, and then life decides to throw you a curveball. Yeah, that was me, just as we were starting to find our footing again. One evening, out of the blue, I got a text from Mark. He wanted to meet up, cautiously stepping back into our lives like a cat testing the water. His return brought back a flood of old feelings and desires, ones I thought I'd managed to tuck away neatly. We agreed to meet for coffee. It felt like old times, but with a new layer of tension. Mark was careful, respectful of the delicate state of our relationship. We talked about everything and nothing, dancing around the topic we both knew was at the forefront of our minds. As we left the cafe, I felt a familiar thrill, mixed with a hint of anxiety. When I told Dan about my meeting with Mark, I expected a mix of reactions. Instead, he surprised me by suggesting we slowly resume our interactions with Mark, but this time, with clearer boundaries and more open communication. It was like opening a door we had cautiously closed, and the dynamic, though different, was equally thrilling. Our encounters started to pick up pace, becoming more adventurous. Dan, ever the planner, suggested new scenarios and settings. Each experience felt like uncharted territory, bringing us closer together. It was intoxicating, the mix of adrenaline and intimacy. Then came another twist. Sarah and Tom reached out. They expressed their desire to reconnect. Given our past, I was skeptical, but Dan was all for it, provided we set stricter rules and kept the lines of communication wide open. Reintroducing Sarah and Tom added a fresh wave of excitement. We organized group activities that extended beyond our private encounters, dinners, game nights, even a hike. It was like building a new kind of friendship, one with layers we all understood but didn't need to discuss openly. A weekend retreat was the real test. We rented a cabin by the lake, away from prying eyes and daily distractions. The freedom of the secluded environment allowed us to experiment with new dynamics and roles. It was liberating, an escape from reality. But it also peeled back layers, revealing underlying tensions we hadn't addressed. Tom's feelings for me resurfaced, creating friction. I could see it in his eyes. The way he lingered a bit too long, the subtle changes in his demeanor. Dan noticed too. His jealousy and protectiveness flared up, challenging the delicate balance of our arrangement. It was like trying to walk a tightrope in a storm. We had a long, heated conversation that night, the kind where every word feels like a step on a minefield. Dan's jealousy was a beast we couldn't ignore. He admitted his fears, and I confessed my confusion and guilt. It was raw and real, but it was also necessary. By the end of the retreat, we had a clearer picture of where we stood. The thrill was still there, but so was the understanding that our boundaries needed constant attention. We returned home with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to navigate our complex desires with eyes wide open. Life had thrown us another curveball, but maybe, just maybe, we were starting to get better at catching them. The journey was far from over, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and dread for what lay ahead. But for now, we were back in the game, and that, in itself, was a small victory. You seriously need to back off, Dan's voice cut through the room like a knife. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. Tom's expression was equally fierce, his hands clenched into fists. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Or what, Dan, you think you can just dictate how this goes? Tom shot back, his tone equally sharp. Great, just what we needed. A full-blown confrontation. The carefully balanced dynamic we'd built was crumbling right before my eyes. I had to intervene before things got worse. Stop it, both of you. I shouted, stepping between them. This isn't helping anyone. The argument forced us to address the underlying issues we'd been avoiding. Our group dynamic was strained, and we had to face the possibility that our arrangement might not be sustainable. Mark, ever the mediator, offered to help. He suggested ways to improve communication and rebuild trust. His involvement eased the tension temporarily, but the strain was still there, lurking beneath the surface. Despite Mark's best efforts, the situation proved too much. Sarah and Tom decided to step back, leaving Dan and me to focus on our own relationship. Their departure was a blow, a reminder of how fragile our arrangement really was. Dan and I had a series of intense discussions, reevaluating our desires and boundaries. We realized we needed a more stable foundation if we were going to make this work. The conversations were exhausting but necessary, peeling back layers of insecurity and mistrust. In a bid to salvage our relationship, we sought counseling. The sessions were tough, brutally honest, and emotionally draining, but they provided the tools we needed to rebuild trust and intimacy. We learned to communicate better, to understand each other's fears and needs. During this period, Mark's role shifted from participant to confidant. His support was crucial as we navigated this difficult time. He listened without judgment, offering advice when needed and simply being there for us. Eventually, we decided to take a break from all external involvement. It was just the two of us, focusing solely on each other. This time allowed us to heal and reconnect on a deeper level. We rediscovered the reasons we fell in love in the first place, finding strength in our bond. The journey was far from over, but for now, we had found a semblance of peace. It was a fragile peace, built on the rubble of our previous mistakes, but it was real. We were ready to face whatever came next, together. So, what if we went back to the beginning? I said, breaking the comfortable silence between us. Dan looked up from his book, curiosity piqued. We'd been through so much, and now, sitting here on our couch, I felt a renewed sense of commitment, like we were ready to face our fantasies again, but with more wisdom this time. Back to the beginning? He asked, raising an eyebrow. You mean like our original fantasies? Exactly, I nodded, feeling a flutter of excitement mixed with caution. But this time, we do it right. Safely, respectfully, and with all the lessons we've learned. We spent the next few evenings revisiting our fantasies, discussing them with a level of openness and clarity we'd never had before. It was like flipping through the pages of a familiar book but noticing new details each time. We redefined our boundaries, making them clearer and more robust. This new approach brought us closer, strengthening our bond in ways I hadn't imagined. Mark remained in our lives, but our interactions with him became more platonic. It was a necessary shift for the stability of our relationship. He was still a close friend, someone we could confide in, but the dynamic had changed. There was no more underlying tension, no more unspoken desires complicating our friendship. Occasionally, Sarah and Tom would reach out. Their messages were friendly, sometimes nostalgic, but we kept a respectful distance. Our focus was on rebuilding and maintaining our own relationship. It felt like we were finally prioritizing us, and it was liberating. In this period of rediscovery, Dan and I found new ways to keep our relationship exciting and fulfilling without involving others. We explored new hobbies together, took spontaneous trips, and even tried our hand at cooking elaborate meals. Each new activity was a small adventure, and we cherished these moments of togetherness. Our experiences had undeniably changed us, but we embraced the growth and transformation. We were more connected and in tune with each other's needs. It was like we had reached a deeper level of understanding, one that only comes from navigating the rough waters together. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I couldn't help but reflect on our journey. It had been tumultuous, no doubt about it, but it had also been incredibly rewarding. We had faced challenges head-on, made mistakes, and learned from them. Our relationship was stronger, built on a foundation of trust, communication, and mutual respect. We've come a long way, haven't we? I said, leaning into Dan. He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me closer. Yeah, we have, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Looking back, I realized that every twist and turn, every high and low, had brought us to this point. We were a team, resilient and stronger than ever. The future was still a mystery, but for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to face it with Dan by my side. Whatever came next, we would face it together, and that was the most thrilling adventure of all. It was one of those lazy Sunday afternoons, the kind where you have nothing planned and everything feels right with the world. Dan and I were lounging in the backyard, sipping iced tea and enjoying the rare moment of peace. The kids were playing inside, their laughter echoing through the open windows. I couldn't help but feel a wave of nostalgia wash over me. Remember those wild days with Mark? I said, a hint of a smile playing on my lips. Dan looked over, his eyes twinkling with amusement. How could I forget? He chuckled. Those were some crazy times. Years had passed since our whirlwind adventures. They had shaped us in ways I never expected, but they no longer defined who we were. Instead, they were like old photographs, faded but cherished memories that we looked back on with a sense of wistfulness. Mark had moved away for a new job opportunity. It was bittersweet seeing him go, but we knew it was for the best. We kept in touch, our friendship enduring despite the distance. The dynamic had changed, of course, but the bond remained strong. We'd talk occasionally, sharing updates about our lives and reminiscing about the past. Sarah and Tom had also moved on, finding new paths and relationships. We wished them well but kept our distance. There was no animosity, just an understanding that our lives had taken different directions. Our focus shifted to building a family. It was a new kind of adventure, one filled with its own set of challenges and rewards. Channeling our energy into creating a nurturing and loving environment for our children was both exhausting and fulfilling. Every day brought new lessons, and our past experiences had taught us valuable ones about communication, trust, and boundaries. These lessons became the cornerstone of our relationship. We'd occasionally discuss our fantasies, but with a clearer understanding of our limits and desires. The openness remained, but the focus was on each other. It felt like we had finally found our rhythm, a balance that worked for us. As I looked over at Dan, I realized just how far we'd come. Our journey had come full circle. We were no longer defined by our past adventures, but enriched by them. They had made us stronger, more connected, and more in tune with each other than ever before. Do you ever miss it? I asked, not entirely sure what answer I was expecting. Dan took a moment, then shook his head. Not really. I mean, it was fun while it lasted, but I'm happy with where we are now. I nodded, feeling a sense of contentment wash over me. Our past was a part of us, but it didn't define us. We had grown, evolved, and come out stronger on the other side. The thrill of the unknown had been replaced by the comfort of knowing we could face anything together. Here's to the future, I said, raising my glass. Dan clinked his glass against mine. To the future. As we sat there, enjoying the simplicity of the moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. And that was the most thrilling adventure of all. We should write a book. I blurted out one evening, mid-wine sip. Dan looked up from his laptop, surprised but intrigued. The idea had been swirling in my mind for a while, and I couldn't shake it off. Our journey had been one hell of a ride, and maybe, just maybe, it could help others. About us? He asked, still processing. Yeah, about everything. The good, the bad, the crazy, I replied, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. It could be cathartic, you know? And maybe it'll help solidify everything we've been through. The process of writing our book was indeed cathartic. We spent countless nights recounting our experiences, laughing and crying as we relived each moment. It felt like we were stitching together a quilt of memories, each patch representing a lesson learned or a hurdle overcome. We were brutally honest, bearing our souls on each page. To our surprise, the book became a bestseller. People were drawn to our honesty and openness about our unconventional path. It sparked conversations and debates, challenging societal norms and encouraging others to explore their own desires and boundaries. We became known not just for our story, but for our willingness to share it with such raw transparency. Invitations to speak at various events started pouring in. We traveled across the country, sharing our insights and lessons learned. Each event was a new adventure, a chance to connect with others who were navigating their own complex relationships. Our story resonated with many, providing inspiration and guidance. It was humbling and empowering at the same time. Of course, our new public persona brought its own set of challenges. Not everyone was supportive. There were skeptics and critics, people who couldn't understand or accept our journey. But we navigated these challenges together, leaning on each other for strength. The support and understanding from our community were overwhelming and reminded us why we started this journey in the first place. Inspired by the positive impact of our story, we decided to start a foundation to help couples navigate their own complex relationships. Our work with the foundation brought us even closer. It gave our journey a new purpose and deepened our connection. We were no longer just telling our story, we were helping others write theirs. Through the foundation, we met many couples with similar experiences. Their stories enriched our understanding and broadened our perspective. Each couple taught us something new, adding another layer to our own journey. It was incredible to see how many people were struggling with the same issues we had faced and to know that we could offer them support and guidance. Looking back, our legacy became one of openness, trust, and communication. We were proud of the journey we had taken and the impact we had made. We had turned our personal challenges into a source of strength and inspiration for others. Our relationship was stronger than ever, built on a foundation of trust, communication, and mutual respect. As I sat with Dan one evening, reflecting on everything we had accomplished, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Our journey had been tumultuous, no doubt, but it had also been incredibly rewarding. We had faced our fears, embraced our desires, and come out stronger on the other side. And in doing so, we had created something beautiful, a legacy that would continue to inspire and guide others long after we were gone. Here's to us, I said, raising my glass. To us, Dan replied, clinking his glass against mine. In that moment, I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it together, just as we always had. And that was the greatest adventure of all. You know what's funny? I said, looking out over the Mediterranean Sea as the sun dipped below the horizon. Dan raised an eyebrow, waiting for the punchline. How we used to think a weekend getaway was adventurous. Now look at us, halfway across the world, exploring ancient ruins and eating things we can't pronounce. He laughed, and I couldn't help but join in. As we grew older, our relationship continued to evolve. We embraced each new phase with excitement and curiosity, like kids in a candy store. Traveling the world had become our new passion, each destination bringing us closer together and enriching our bond in ways we never imagined. Each adventure was a new chapter in our ongoing story. From the bustling streets of Tokyo to the serene beaches of Bali, we soaked up different cultures and experiences, letting them shape us and our relationship. There was something magical about getting lost in a foreign city, relying on each other to navigate through language barriers and unfamiliar customs. It was a reminder of how far we'd come and how much we could accomplish together. Our children had grown up, too, and they were aware of our story. We'd never hidden our past from them. Instead, we used it as a teaching tool, an example of honesty and openness. It shaped their views on relationships, making them more understanding and less judgmental. They appreciated our candor, even if it sometimes made for awkward dinner conversations. We continued to write and speak about our journey, sharing our insights and lessons learned with anyone who would listen. It was fulfilling work, knowing we were helping others navigate their own complex relationships. Each talk, each book signing, each heartfelt letter from a reader reminded us that our story mattered, that it had a purpose beyond our own lives. In our golden years, we often looked back on our journey with gratitude and pride. The challenges we had faced and the triumphs we had celebrated had shaped us into the strong, connected couple we were. We celebrated our anniversaries with joy and reflection, each year a testament to our love and resilience. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. Here's to us, I said, raising my glass, a tradition we'd started many years ago. To us, Dan replied, clinking his glass against mine. The familiar sound was a comforting reminder of the bond we shared. Our story was one of growth, transformation, and enduring love. We had navigated a complex path, full of twists and turns, but had emerged stronger and more connected than ever. Every challenge we faced had brought us closer, every triumph had reinforced our bond. And as we stood there, watching the sun set over the vast expanse of the sea, I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it together. Life had a way of throwing curveballs, but we had learned to catch them and throw them back with a smile. Our journey was far from over, but for now, we were content. We had built a life filled with love, adventure, and purpose. And that, I realized, was the greatest adventure